ancient peoples recognized four elements. Two of them, fire and water, came together before the camera of our next guest, and I would argue changed the public consciousness about the environment. I'm speaking of Josh Fox, who captured the sight of flames coming out of a water faucet, and which I think introduced the world to many of the harmful effects of fracking and other environmental practices. But Josh is, besides being a great filmmaker, he is a journalist in multiple forms. He is the artistic director of a theater group and a theater performer himself. He is a musician, and he is the author of a new book entitled The Truth Has Changed. So without further ado, Josh Fox, thanks for coming on the program.
Oh, it's great to be on. Thank you so much.
So my understanding is that The Truth Has Changed comes from a monologue or one-person show you put together. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is actually on its way to becoming a movie. The original idea was proposed to me by Sheila Nevins, the great documentary guru at HBO. And as you know, Gasland and Gasland Part 2 and How to Let Go of the World, that environmental trilogy, all premiered on HBO because of her instigation. And then she said, you know, you've been on the road, you campaign, I've seen you on stage, I want you to do this one-man show. And Sheila comes from the theater, so do I. And she said, I want you to go out there and make a solo performance, and then we're going to tape that and put it on HBO and make it into a movie. So I started working on it. I worked on it for about a year and a half. And at one of the workshop performances in New York City, Dan Simon, the terrific editor from Seven Stories Press, was in the audience, and he said, this is a book. We have to make this into a book. This is your first book. He's also publishing another book of mine called Josh Fox's Anti-Totalitarian Bedtime Stories, which is for next year. But this is The Truth Has Changed, the monologue. The book has come out first, and we've just completed doing the filming for the film. And it is a solo performance. I'm drawing on my history as a theater performer and as a theater director to make the show. And it's very much in the style of Spalding Gray, sitting at a desk, storytelling, narration, and relating all the experiences that happened across 2 decades that book covers. And I'm really excited for the movie to come out. I think the book is great. It's a whole new chapter for me, so I'm very excited about it.
So, you know, it's a couple interesting things about that I'd love to pursue with you, Josh. Number one is to do a one-person show. It reminds me of the quote Bob Dylan had, that if you go out in front of an audience with just an acoustic guitar, it's like one soldier facing down an army. I mean, do you have that feeling when you do this as a one-person performance, or?
You know, it's interesting because my theater company, International Wow Company, which I founded when I was 23 years old, was always a collaborative group of huge casts, right? Our shows were epic shows that were hours long. They had actors from all over the world, from Thailand, from Japan, from Indonesia, from France, from Germany, from America, from Taiwan. And our projects were these collaborations where we would interview each other, and that would create a story on global themes, on globalization, on the Iraq War, on 9/11. So, you know, when I put out Gasland, which was this sort of strange solo project, away from my theater company, away from my community, it was this odd solo thing, and I ended up going out on the road for 10 years. And that film, we wouldn't just show it on television, we would put it into communities in grassroots settings, right? So that we were going and building that fracking movement across the country and across the world. And those personal appearances of me and the other people who were organizing at a community level became the secondary performance. So we would show the film, and then we would have this hour or 2 hour long discussion in which we're telling stories, and we're talking about organizing, and we're talking about the issues, and we're talking about the science, the latest science on fracking. And that became a kind of roadshow. So I went from this ensemble, which was 30 or 40 people, which I loved to be a part of, to being a solo act on the road for quite a long time. So it was a really kind of natural transition to making this solo show, which I never thought I would make a solo performance. It was never in my purview as something that I wanted to do, but it feels very, very natural. You know, so I love it. I'm comfortable doing it. The audiences across the country have been tremendous. We've done, I don't know, 30 or 40 performances across the nation, and right before the midterms, as an organizing tool to help people in progressive causes and in progressive races.
I was going to make some wisecrack about, since you're both the director and the performer, whether that means you have fewer problems with your cast.
Actually, it means I have more problems.
That's right. That's what I was thinking too. The disagreements are more intense.
Internal debate. Well, the theater performance, I co-direct with my friend Ron Russell, who is a brilliant Obie Award-winning theater director who I've actually worked with since college. He's directed me in so many plays for the last 20 years that it was very, very natural. So I wasn't alone in doing that part of it.
Well, that's good. And now it's a book. And I always think it's interesting when you start a project in one form and it gets transmuted to another. I mean, obviously you wrote the monologue down and so on, but I would imagine, Josh Fox, that when you were writing the monologue down, you were picturing the performing of it, you were picturing the stage and the audience, and to see it come out as a book, is that a kind of context shift? Does that make it feel different to you? And did you feel that you should change certain things for that context?
The book is different than the performance,
Okay.
but I wrote the book by speaking it and then revising it. A funny thing happened years and years ago when I quit smoking. I was an avant-garde theater director before I was an environmentalist, and my writing habits were always, here I'm having a cigarette, I'm typing, and I'm typing, and I'm typing. And I quit. And so I stopped being able to have the ability to just type and write and type and write. I don't know why. Sometimes you have an addiction in your life, and then you change that addiction, and all of your work habits have to change, right? So I then started, the only way I could write was to speak, and I could revise. But I couldn't do the first draft that way. So the speaking of it, and as the monologues in the voiceovers in my films, they're never written ahead of time. I will react to the material. I have a microphone, and I'm in that space where I'm speaking those words, and then I'm revising them and revising them and revising them. So it'll get transcribed, and then I'll have a transcript, and I'll rewrite it from there. So it's been an organic process of doing that in front of an audience. And that makes the book, I think, very efficient. Because when you're writing, you can get into all sorts of curly cues and down rabbit holes and so on. But when you have to keep an audience's attention in front of you, that becomes an essentializing process. So the book, I think, is quite efficient in terms of how it moves. It doesn't move in the same way that you might move in a novel or a non-fiction book. It moves as if someone is speaking it to you, and it holds your attention in that way. And that was always the proving ground for how the book worked. I had to do it in front of an audience in order for the book to work, which was very odd. And that's something I'm very happy, like Dan Simon, the editor at Seven Stories, was very keen on making sure that integrity of the sense of it being a performance was always there with us.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I noticed that the book is a decent length, but a compact length, as I think I recall, 144 pages maybe. And so very focused, so that's very interesting to me, because I find that sometimes in my own writing, even just sitting in my office, which is an overblown word for a room in my house, that I have to switch to dictation or I even have a keyboard with no one of those cheap things with no screen, or just 2 lines of a screen that I sometimes type in.
Yeah.
So I'm not because otherwise I get hung up in the visual and so I have to change the context. So that's a really interesting process. It's a really go ahead.
Yeah, it's more fun. Sitting and writing, people don't realize sitting and writing is like a horrible thing. It's horrible. You sit alone. Your hand gets cramped up. It's very rough to do. And whereas being in rehearsal, being in performance with other people in this collaborative sense, is always a joy. We're gonna have a visitor.
Who has a visitor?
My cat is.
Excellent. We
Andy.
We
right,
like, no, go back to the cat. Don't go to me. Who's this?
She's named after the hurricane. Official name, Sandinista.
Saint Denis still
Who's about
okay.
to knock
Okay.
over the
Out of the
computer.
as in
About to
Daniel
knock over
Ortega
the
or
computers
the
that had no
Clash
purpose.
album?
Yeah,
Which
to both.
one?
To both.
Both. Fair. The
You
only good
know,
answer.
revolutionary spirit right there.
Yeah, excellent. We love it. And by the way, speaking of revolutionary spirit, since you mentioned, and we're kind of jumping around a little bit, I actually have two thoughts. One is what you said about writing being an agonizing experience is so true. From time to time, people will say to me, "Oh, you're a writer. I love writing." And I always say, if you love writing, you're not a writer. Just, you know. But it's painful. I love having written. I love thinking about writing. The actual process, not so great. But you talked about going from city to city, since we're talking about revolutionary things now. You talked about going to city with Gasland, and what popped to mind, I hadn't thought of this for years, but many years, I think not long after the Cuban Revolution, there was a group that was going around with a portable projector and screen and showing movies to remote villages where they had never seen a movie or any kind of visual medium before.
Wow.
And they made a movie about the showing of the movie. And I can't bring obviously it's in Spanish. I don't think it was ever translated, but I can't think of the name now. I'm going to have to think of it. But one of the great scenes in it is they ask one of the older women in the villages if she knows what a film is, and she says no. And they say, well, what do you think it is? And she said, I think it's some kind of dance. And she wasn't really wrong, was she?
No, no. Dance has been a big part of my work, actually. The film How to Let Go of the World and Love All the Things Climate Can't Change, which is the third film in the Gasland trilogy, begins with a dance sequence. It ends with a dance sequence. It's kind of a dance around the world. Music, dance, these theatrical elements have always been a part of what I've done because essentially the environment is about culture. It's about humanity. It's about human beings. And these are the things that we respond to. In all of my work, I have, wall-to-wall music, and that's sort of my orchestration of the films, right? Gasland has 50 different music tracks in it, from Pete Seeger to Radiohead to Beethoven to obscure noise music tracks that we love. Same thing with Gasland Part 2, which opens with Good Vibrations, the Beach Boys, over the pictures of the BP oil spill. And How to Let Go of the World opens with Obla Di Obla Da by the Beatles and closes with a song written by a Samoan band on a remote island in Samoa where Naco Bear and Chutescat Martinez and Alexis Cross from Sleigh Bells and Rufus Cappadocia, all these wonderful musicians chime in and play this whole tune. And in The Truth Has Changed, the performance, I actually do a tap routine in the middle of Hurricane Sandy, sort of a la Singing in the Rain, a kind of update of Singing in the Rain. And it ends with dance. Alex Ebert, a.k.a. Edward Sharpe in the Magnetic Zeros, does a lot of the music for The Truth Has Changed. And the end of that performance is his song, Truth, which is one of the most inspiring songs that I've heard in many, many years. Alex and I worked together on the Bernie campaign. I did the video for his song, Feel the Burn. And we became friends and worked together in New Orleans to create a lot of new material in his studio here. So he's been a key collaborator. Music, dance, it's such a spine. But when you think about what dance is and what performance is, of course, that has a direct implication into film, because film is this dance of images in front of you. And what's interesting about touring, and what's vital about touring, is that, to be honest, movies on their own don't change the world. Movies can influence people's thinking, influence people's direction. But if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of changing the world, which is what we wanted to do with Gasland and what we wanted to do with all these projects, is you have to do the things that do change the world, which is organizing, meeting with people, being there on the grassroots level. So our tours of those films, and we toured extensively. I mean, Gasland, I think, was 150 cities. Gasland Part 2, 75 cities. How to Let Go, 100 cities. This new Truth Has Changed. We've gone, I've lost count in terms of the performance part of it. That's almost 500 cities or something. And to do that is to build connections, to build a movement. Movements are what changes the world. Movies can influence that. Movies can do a lot in that conversation. But it is our work, and it is the organizers out there that are the most crucial people, and often the least thanked. So I really love going out into the world and meeting those folks who are doing that hard work of knocking on doors and calling their neighbors and sending out the emails and having the gatherings and harassing their legislators and getting out there and really making change. So
well, you know, you are singing from my hymnal, or we're singing from the same hymnal, because I'm constantly hitting on the same theme. That's where the action happens. And I don't. And then once again, we're talking with Josh Fox, whose new book is and upcoming film and solo performance is "The Truth Has Changed." I also find, as a kind of writer / talker, whatever it is, that I think, I hope, I get better at that when I go out and actually talk to people and know, I mean, it's almost like your solo performance thing in miniature, that when I know what convinces, what seems to reach people and what doesn't, that hopefully makes me better. Maybe they get something from it, but also, as you say, it's a way to honor the people who are doing the real work. Because when you take a break, as I am in Washington D.C., and go to your hometown of Utica, New York, or somewhere and knock on doors, that's tough work.
Oh yeah, especially in Utica, it's cold up there.
It is in November, yes.
I mean, well, that's what happened with the fracking movement. We hit every single little town in New York State, every single town in Pennsylvania, huge amounts of towns in Texas, in these hot spots, right? So, knowing that map is important, but it's a dialogue. It's a dialogue. This is our offering as journalists. Here's the report, right? The Truth Has Changed is a journalistic report. The Gasland is a report. Here's what we're finding in the world. Now let's talk about it. Let's have that dialogue. That's part of the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly, it's so interesting because, as you say, with the very title and with the premise, truth is mutable, and people's perception of it is mutable. We have to change with the truth. I worked on the Bernie campaign too, and one of the reasons I'm doing what I'm doing now is I felt if you want a political revolution, you need a media revolution, but that's just one dimension of the truth too. So tell us more about what people will find when they look at, or when they read, or eventually view The Truth Has Changed.
Well, the truth has changed starts with a student at a university after Gasland raising her hand and looking at me and saying, how do we know what's true? And she says, you say all these things about how fracking is bad and climate change is real, but then we can look on the internet and see that the opposite of all those things are true. So how do we know? And I begin to answer the question, and I realize I can't answer the question, at least not quickly. And it keeps sticking in my mind over and over again as I'm trying to drive home through a hurricane. And it leads me back to the origins, at least in my life, of propaganda, which was 9/11. I was in New York City during 9/11. I was one of the people who delivered food to the first responders. We had our own little makeshift first response outlet. We were called the Church of Pompeii because we worked out of the Church of Pompeii. And then we watched all this incredible emotion and sincerity get turned into a drone for war, to kill people in foreign countries that we'd never met, that we were never going to meet, that had nothing to do with this, especially in terms of Iraq, and watched how that turned, and how that sense of outrage and anger became a propaganda that fueled a fire like a microbe stuck inside of your head that only wants retribution. And then I watched the oil and gas industry come after me for 5 years and try to impugn and malign and smear every single thing that was in my film Gasland, from saying that it was a fake to saying that I was a fake. And they followed me around the country for 5 long years. And that was very, very psychologically impactful. I mean, they come after you with everything that they've got. You can't go to sleep at night without thinking about Steve Bannon and these people who were at Breitbart.com attacking my every single move. Then I realized that those same people took over the world. Cambridge Analytica, Steve Bannon, that cabal, through psychographics and all the data mining and search engine optimization and targeted ads that they did on Facebook and online, which we're reading so much about these days, really the oil and gas industry, which has come off scot-free. We love to talk about the Russians. We love to talk about all their influence. But, it's perfectly legal for ExxonMobil to tamper in our elections. It's perfectly legal for ExxonMobil to end the world. So we're not talking about ExxonMobil and their role and the oil and gas industry's role in the smear and misinformation campaigns in the 2016 election. And I believe that those were very, very big influences. And I am the beta test for those kinds of things. So it's tracing that arc of smear and misinformation and propaganda. And when you are on Facebook and you're on Google, and your news feed or your search engine is only giving you back exactly what you want, right? There are algorithms. Cambridge Analytica amassed 4,000 to 5,000 data points on every adult American. Cambridge Analytica knows you better than you know yourself. They know what you're searching for online. They know what you know. They know what you don't know. They know where you went because of your GPS. They know what kind of porn you watch. They know what kind of products you like to buy. And all of that creates a psychological database of each and every American. That psychological database then helps inform them what kind of political ads they can target specifically at you, and also what kind of political divisions they can exploit. So, for example, on Facebook, they could target ads to black people that only black people would see, right? They would say, Hillary Clinton is a racist, and point out all these things about racism, right? So, but no one else would know that this was happening. It's like running a Willie Horton ad with no political repercussions. Or online, they could target fractivists and say, oh, Hillary Clinton is pro-fracking. You have to vote for Jill Stein or stay home. So they're worsening those divisions and making it, and in this case, their objective was to elect Donald Trump, right? So they were doing everything possible to disparage and malign Hillary and people who were going to vote for Hillary. And I was one of the people who campaigned pretty hardcore, obviously, for Bernie, was a Bernie surrogate, went all over the country, but then realized that I had to go back in and inject whatever my beliefs were into that conversation. I served on the Democratic Platform Committee. I saw that on that platform committee, we made real progress. A part of the Democratic platform was $15 an hour minimum wage, was legalization of marijuana, was a ban or a disincentivizing of frack gas power plants, which is extremely important. We didn't get the fracking ban, but we were going to work on that. We were going to ban frack gas power plants, even more important. So I saw all the good that the Bernie campaign did and how that Bernie movement really started to change what was happening at the fundamentals, the basics of what was going on with the Democratic Party. So I felt, yes, let's go ahead and continue this conversation. In the Democratic platform, it stated that we were going to have after 100 days of the Clinton administration, we're going to have a government-wide summit on climate change. All of Congress, the executive branch, on climate change. That was in the platform. We were going to hold those people accountable. Now, I'm not a big fan of Hillary Clinton, but I was a fan of holding her accountable. So when I saw on Facebook people being pushed towards Jill Stein, who are my constituents in the fracking world, I was very, very upset about this. And I started to wonder, well, what's actually happening here? And you see that those targeted ads, those psychological manipulations, all those things that the Trump campaign did so well because of Steve Bannon, because of Cambridge Analytica, really had an effect. In the same way that we just saw that they had an effect in Brazil. 40 million WhatsApp fake news messages direct to voters gets Bolsonaro, a bigoted guy who wants to drill the Amazon to hell, elected in Brazil. We're seeing the truth changing because when you don't know what reality is anymore, because you're in a Twitterverse or you're in a Facebook universe and you've gone down that hall of mirrors and you can't see out of it because reality is not coming into you from any part of that spectrum, the truth has become fundamentally altered. And that's dangerous for democracy.
Oh, sure, it absolutely is. And, it's complicated for me because I feel on the one hand, Josh Fox said people, maybe some centrist Democrats, for lack of a better term, don't look at what they could have done better. But in an election this close, everything is a factor. And while you were talking, it reminded me of a really interesting thing that happened during this election. I have a friend, a writer friend I like a lot. I don't think he'd mind my naming him. Dave Nyward has written a lot on the alt-right and the far right. And I noticed, I thought Dave was getting uncharacteristically hostile to Bernie supporters online. And then I met him for, beer or whatever. And I said, what's up with this? And he said, well, my timeline is just filled with this aggressive stuff about how you're crazy if you vote for Hillary. And I said, well, that's weird because my timeline is filled with, it was like the opposite. We were getting completely different information from social media, and it was dividing him against the Bernie left. Mine was dividing me against the more mainstream Democrats, that it's my job as an activist to persuade, not get antagonized toward. So I feel that that's kind of a microcosmic, right?
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I look, both things are true. Number one, the centrist Democrats were terrible. They were terrible. They ran a terrible campaign. They had a terrible candidate. They had a really bad track record on all sorts of things, right? Like 8 years of Obama and emissions went up. 8 years of Obama, and he just went out there and boasted about how he drilled more than the Bush administration did, and how we had more. Fracking is Obama's presidency, right? So they couldn't defend themselves on that way. 95% of the recovery from the 2008 economic collapse went directly to the 1%. I mean, that's not a recovery. That's trickle-up economics. The centrist Democrats were not the party of the people. Let's just be honest about that. Bernie was the party of the people. Now, we were able to work with them, and we were definitely set up to be pushing the hell out of them. But yeah, I mean, this was a disaster in terms of how out of touch they were with the American people. And I watched that happen from early on in the primaries when I was a Bernie surrogate, all the way through to the Democratic National Convention when the speeches were completely tone deaf and there was unrest on the floor of the convention. Nevertheless, the Supreme Court, basic protections of our public lands, all of the insanity of racism and sexism that's pouring out of the Trump administration. You cannot possibly say that Trump and Clinton are the same. You cannot possibly say that it wouldn't have been preferable in at least 9 out of 10 categories to have Hillary Clinton as the president and not Donald Trump. Now, I mean, do I want to see Bernie run in 2020? Absolutely. Will I sign up to be a surrogate? Absolutely. Will I go out there and campaign my ass off? Absolutely. Because those positions are grounded. They're grounded in fighting for working people and fighting for the environment and fighting to stop climate change and fighting for Medicare for all these things that the centrist Democrats don't do. And interestingly, when I go online now and I attack or criticize, I should say, the centrist Democrats on a position, let's say on fracking or on Medicare for all, for whatever, I get the same Twitter troll bots and really pejorative, puerile, threatening, intimidating kind of attacks against me as I did when I was criticizing the oil and gas industry. So that really, really confuses me. And I'm wondering what is actually going on. So some of this research about how the oil and gas industry has fundamentally infiltrated our democratic system, which we know is true. I mean, and I want to see where that's going in terms of Facebook and Twitter. Facebook, Twitter, social media, these are responsible for enormous amounts of energy, right? We have to take a look at the whole picture. What is the dialectic here? Yes, you have your morals. Of course, the Green Party might be anti-fracking and for all these policy positions. When you go ahead and you end up taking a vote away from Hillary Clinton and putting it towards Jill Stein in swing states, and you help to elect Donald Trump, well, then your morality has actually helped do the opposite of what you wanted it to do, right? Or your morality, if you're, in one or another vein, is going to be turned against you.
Right.
These people are extremely good at taking your most innermost, deepest convictions and turning that into the opposite political result. We've seen that for years with the Republicans doing that to the lower class, to working class people, saying, vote for us because we're going to help you. We're realizing that they're actually going to hurt them.
Well, I think that's right. And I do think that, one way out of this morass is how about we stop judging people who don't vote the way we think they should And how about we just make this case to them that you and I are making now, that here's a reason why you should not do that in a swing state. And how about we all, we all learn to identify with a movement and a set of values and a set of goals, and not I'm a Hillary person, I'm a Bernie person, I'm a Beto person now, or how about I'm a no fracking, Green New Deal, Medicare for whatever it is. That's what I believe in, a society that supports its members.
Well, what was so interesting and fascinating about working on fracking for so long is it challenged a lot of my most basic assumptions about politics in America. I never asked people what party they were voting for. I never asked people what their politics were. Not for a long time. It was, we were going to protect our water. We were going to protect our communities. We were going to protect our children. We were going to protect our climate. That moved beyond the normal partisan political lines. And I think there are a lot of issues that do that. And I think that, when we're talking about this crisis, which is a crisis of media, social media, and online media too, mainstream media, don't even get me started, we have to start talking about how do we get into an unmediated space. And that's the theater. An unmediated space, that's a rally. An unmediated space, that's where we're all assembling in rooms together, face to face, neighbor to neighbor. Neighbor talking to neighbor is stronger than any amount of money that they're going to spend. It's stronger than a lot of the divisions and walls that they're going to put up in front of us when we are constantly looking at our devices. That is what I believe in, and that's the grassroots. That's the organizing part of it. And I think when we frame ourselves as talking about politics in terms of 2016 or 2018 or 2020, you got to realize that the election and the vote is a tiny, tiny, tiny piece of what democracy actually is. Democracy happens every day. Democracy is us talking to our neighbors. Democracy is us organizing. Democracy is us protecting our communities. Democracy is us being involved. And if we don't want to stay involved all the time, then we can't really say we're participating in democracy. That is our civic obligation. That's what we have to encourage. And that's what we have to make fun and exciting and relevant and interesting for people, which is where I think culture comes into this, and why I do this through the movies and do this through performance, is to try to make sure that we're participating in a way that is meaningful and inclusive and gets people enthusiastic. So that's what I think the movies have a chance to be able to do, and that's why and performance. So for me, it's this unmediated event of being in the room with people, whether you just watched a film and then you're all in the room, or you're actually watching a live performance and then we all get to talk, or it's a big rally or it's a big concert or something like that. It helps us get away from our online divisions and see what reality actually is and can be. That's an important step in this political consciousness.
And unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there because we're running out of time. Fortunately, in that it's a great way to end. Unfortunately, in that I'd love to talk to you about unmediated spaces and other things too. But Josh Fox, the new book is The Truth Has Changed. Thanks so much for all your great work, and thanks for coming on the program.
Oh, very, very much a pleasure. Thanks again.